All right, continuing on from yesterday, we're going to the algebra. We've got to figure out what is the first step when we're dealing with algebra. So we need to remember that f of x can be a y. And then just like what was said, we're going to switch the x and y. We're also going to see here that to undo this, we're going to follow the same steps as we would in words. We would have to divide by -1 and then take the square root. So x divided by -1. But when we divide by -1, we get negative x. And then take the square root. But we need to talk about how we would write. Yesterday we started with y equals because we were just dealing with lines, and then we wrote the language of y inverse. But now we have f of x. So to symbolize its inverse, we're going to put f inverse equals square root of negative x. We, in the process, took the square root at a time. Anytime you take the square root, we need to include a plus or minus. But here's where this domain piece off to the side comes in play. This is where this domain piece becomes important. If we look at this domain, we want the input to be less than or equal to 0. So if I were to do a t-chart of that function, I would need numbers less than or equal to 0. We learned about inverses, how the domains and the range switch. We learned whenever we talked about inverses, the domains and the ranges switch. How if this is the domain of the function, that means the range of the inverse is going to look like it. So we've got to figure out which one of these, the positive or the negative, would spit this sort of thing out. The domains of functions will become the range of the inverse. So whatever this pertains to, if this pertains to negatives, you want to keep negative outputs. So I'm going to erase that positive symbol and keep the negative symbol. This is technically our inverse. The reason why we even have a strict domain, we talked about how, the inverse is not a function. But look at the equation. All even powers will entail this. All even powers. If I take the square root, the fourth root, the sixth root, I'm always going to include that plus or minus symbol. And I have to determine, okay, what's the functions domain dealing with? Because that's going to affect my output. Next problem. With the algebra, you change your f of x to be y, and then you switch your x and y. When I say clean it up, so cubed root of x over -3. I would love for you to get to this position where anytime you see a cubed root of a -27, you definitely can think -3. I want you to get to that point. Now, if you left your answer as f inverse of x equals cubed root of x divided by -27, I would be okay with that on a test in this 7.4 section, because all it says is I can find inverses of nonlinear functions. That means, can you show me that you definitely know how to undo a function? This shows me that. But I need you to get here if you want to be proficient and fluent for the ACT, SAT, whatever. Next problem. Oh, hold on. Next problem. We need to make sure we copy down that comma. So I'm going to skip now to the algebra. Algebra, if I change this to y equals x to the fourth, I switch the x and y. And you already told me I'm going to take the fourth root on both sides to get y by itself. So now we've got to discuss, all right, this is f inverse of x equal to, wait, plus or minus 4th root of x. I put it in red because we've got to determine. We can't have this because that is not a function. So I've got to figure out, is it going to be, well, is it going to be the positive side or the negative side? It's got to be the positive because this domain becomes this range. So we're going to either keep the positive, but positive 4th root, we could also just keep it like that.